Hello, I'm the 10-minute English teacher. Let's get you exam ready. Today we're thinking about English language paper 2 and I'm going to be providing you with a walking talking mock. Before we get going, don't forget to like and subscribe. There are plenty of things on the channel to help you revise for English literature and English language. Okay, my walking talking mock for English language paper 2. Before we get going, let's think about how we are going to spend our time in the exam. You have 1 hour and 45 minutes and there are 2 sections. You spend 1 hour on the reading section responding to 2 extracts that are provided, and then after that you've got the writing section which takes you 45 minutes. They are both worth 40 marks and are both worth 50% of the marks available. So here's the reading section. There are 4 things to do. The first 15 minutes of the exam involves you reading the 2 non-fiction extracts that you get, and then you simply need to tick 4 boxes after you've read those extracts to find the statements that are true. After that, you've got the summary question where you have to summarise the texts. That takes you about 10-12 minutes, and that's worth 8 marks. You have to analyse language for question 3. That's worth 12 marks, and then you've got a mini essay comparing the methods used, which is worth 16 marks. Okay, question 1. So question 1 is relatively straightforward. Most students get all of the marks available. You simply need to tick 4 boxes after you've read the extract. It takes you a little bit longer to read the extracts in paper 2. Make sure you've read them carefully. Here is source A that we're going to be using today. You can feel free to screenshot this or use a snipping tool, place that in a document and print it if you'd like. If you haven't got that available to you, that's not a problem. All you need is a piece of paper and a pen for today, and you can use the play bar to revisit these extracts as you need them. So I'll read you through, I'll read source A to you now. So it's 21st century non-fiction. Oh, We Do Like to Be Beside the Seaside by Martin Nethercott, an article from a national newspaper printed in 2022. I remember being a child and visiting Blithby-on-Sea with my parents. My memories had me expecting a colourful and happy place with neat rows of shops selling sticks of rock and buckets and spades. Having spent last weekend at Blithby-on-Sea with my own children, I'm left wondering how reliable my memories are, as well as being petrified by just how much the world has changed since I was a boy. We parked the car and stepped out into the thrashing wind. The shops are mostly boarded up. What was once a shop selling ice creams and candy floss was now a kebab shop. It was flanked by empty shops on either side that seemed to be bullying it into covering itself with wooden boards in the same fashion. Given the fact that we were the only ones in sight, it might not be long before it does. Eventually, we saw some other people out to enjoy the day. In the arcade, a miserable little place that seemed to plead to be knocked down. A couple of old women sat together drinking tea from paper cups at a plastic table. They looked at us with suspicion, having not seen the faces of strangers for quite some time, it would seem. We spent the rest of the afternoon on the beach. The sea was lumpy and fierce, and the icy wind blew through the buttons of our coats, taunting us for having left the house. Seagulls taunted us with their witch-like calls, and the clouds seemed to want to join in, amassing in the sky and threatening us with rain. As the sea clumsily thumped against the stones, I couldn't help but think about what I was missing out on at home. The post needed sorting, cushions were in want of being straightened, and a door needed painting. I longed to be at home, away from the empty roads and empty feelings. There are some wonderful little towns to explore on the coast, many of which have really benefited from visitors over the course of the pandemic. Do yourself a favour and visit one of them and stay away from Blithby-on-Sea, unless you want a kebab, and if you do, you'd better hurry. So that's source A. In the exam, you have got enough time to read these at your own pace. You've got enough time to do that, and it's important that you do so you don't make any misconceptions or misunderstandings that will hinder you being successful as you write about the extracts. So we move on now to source B. It's 19th century non-fiction, A Day at the Seaside. William Alsop wrote about his experiences of life in the 1800s. In 1872, he wrote about his visit to a seaside resort to escape city life for a weekend break. July the 13th, 1872. Today was a most extraordinary day. I ventured south by train and spent the day at a seaside resort, making the most of the changing weather with the warmth and sunshine heralding the oncoming season of summer. Having spent a pleasant day in the company of the sea air and the melodious tones of waves meeting the sand was nothing short of blissful. I went through my day as leisurely as the many boats upon the water that were gently led along by the movement of the breeze. Upon my arrival, I was greeted by the hustle and bustle of the town. The railway station was quite a scene, with throngs of people leaving in all directions, with their excited voices and conversations filling the air like birdsong. Whilst I had initially hoped to escape the company of my fellow man, I found myself somewhat surprised to be part of such a gleeful crowd and part of their optimistic chorus. I walked past vendors selling all manner of trinkets and souvenirs and enjoyed the invigorating mingling of people of all classes. I was taken aback by the playful calls of the seagulls, which made the familiar sounds of city pigeons seem like mournful songs. As the day approached noon, I walked upon the beach and found a pleasing spot to place myself for part of the afternoon. The sand was hot underfoot, and I knew I would need to seek the water for respite at some point, especially given the increasing warmth of the sun. I'd bought a small basket of things to dine upon and my post to read, and enjoyed a carefree hour on the shore, following which a swim was sought. After retiring from the beach to a bench on the promenade, I could not help but reflect on the drudgery of my daily life, left far behind me in the thick and dense smoke of so many factory chimneys that grow taller and more numerous every day, like nettles conquering a garden flower bed. The dull tones and colours of my existence had been swapped for those of the sea, a jewellery box of brilliant blues and greens that had me contemplating choosing never to return to the station and the train that would be awaiting me tomorrow afternoon. So those are our two extracts that we're going to be using today. And as I said, if you're not able to print those out to have in front of you, it's not an issue. You can simply use the play bar to return to them as you need to throughout the course of our time together. So we've got question 1 now, and here's what we need to do. So read again the first part of source A from lines 1 to 4. Choose 4 statements below which are true. Shade the circles in the boxes of the ones that you think are true, and choose a maximum of 4 statements. If you make an error, cross out the whole box. And if you change your mind and require a statement that is being crossed out, then draw a circle around the box. So there are some things to do if you make a mistake. They're outlined there clearly for you, but ultimately you are simply looking to shade the circle, so colour in the middly bit of the boxes for the ones that are true. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to read through these statements yourself and then come to that conclusion. Most students get all of the marks available for this question, so this should be something that you're able to do and achieve alone. You've got 3 minutes. You'll hear from me when your time is up. Okay, you've had the time that you need. Let's move on and think about which statements are true. So the writer had visited Blitheby-on-Sea for the first time. That's simply not the case. He went there when he was a boy. The writer had wondered how reliable his memories were. Now, in that statement, we've got that word reliable. When you go back over that first paragraph, the only thing that you're looking for is that word reliable, and then scan the text for that, and then you'll find out whether or not that answer is true. The same is the case for sticks of rock, the phrase in the next statement. So there had been shops selling sticks of rock. That, of course, is true, so the box has been shaded there. The writer had visited Blitheby-on-Sea with his parents. That also is true. The writer didn't have children. That isn't the case. He'd visited with them. The writer was expecting a happy and colourful place. Absolutely. And it has changed a lot, Blitheby-on-Sea, and the writer could not remember there being shops. Is not the case. He can remember the shops that were selling sticks of rock. So this isn't a very complicated question. It's not meant to be. You spent the first part of your time reading the extracts, and the first question is there to settle you in and give you some success before moving on to the more challenging questions, which leads us to think about question 2. Okay, now let's think about question 2. So this is the summary question. Lots of students miss out on marks here by analysing language and only using a few quotes. It's wanting you to be able to scan the text and find the information that you need. So you're handling both sources in their entirety and finding the things that are relevant. In this question, you probably want to use about 8 quotes. So we've got this question here for us to think about. So you need to refer to source A and source B for this question. Both sources give details about places the writers have been to. So they've both been to the seaside. Use details from both sources to write a summary of the differences between the seaside resorts. So they're very different places. You probably want to find 3 or 4 references to what those places are like from each of the sources in your response. So before I give you the opportunity to have a go at this question, if you're aiming for a 4, 5, 6, have a quick intro saying how they're different and then summarise. You could use 3 or 4 quotes for each source. So in your little intro, you will have been comparative and explained how you know that they're different and why they are. And then you've proved that by exploring both sources and writing summaries, finding as much information that's relevant as possible. If you're aiming for a 7, 8, 9 grade, you want to make some direct comparisons using a full range of quotes. So you're still aiming for 7 or 8 quotes, but when you're using a reference from source A, you're going to then see if you can make a direct comparison to how it's different in source B. So slightly different ways of approaching it, and that's what you need to do for this question. But you do need to be using a range of quotes, finding those key things in the text. So you get about 10, 12 minutes for this question. I'm going to give you 10 minutes now to attempt this. So on the paper that you have in front of you, it's now time for you to write and respond to this. You can use the play bar to revisit the sources, and you'll hear from me when your time is up. Okay, you've had enough time on this now. I'm going to show you a model response before we move on to thinking about question 3. So here is a part of a top band response. Might have 2 paragraphs like this perhaps to really explore the whole text, but this gives you an idea of the sort of things that you might be writing about if you're aiming for the top band. The writer of source B describes visiting a thriving and popular place and mentions the chorus of voices and hustle and bustle of the town, which makes it seem like a lively place where people are happy to be part of a like-minded crowd. The writer of source A visits a very contrasting place which is devoid of tourists and mentions how they were the only ones in sight. The locals look at them with suspicion, which contrasts the welcoming sights of the vendors mentioned in source A. So we've explored the way that these places are very different and how they're contrasting. We've done that directly by comparing. Might move on if we were continuing with this response to thinking about something like the sea or the weather, in fact, to explore how these places are different. And that takes us to think about question 3. Okay, English language paper 2, question 3. Let's think about that now. So question 3 is language analysis. It's what you do for English literature, finding bits of the text that are worth exploring and thinking about the different layers of meaning and the different ideas that are communicated by the words and phrases. So here is a question for you, and to make this easier for you, you've got an extract here from the text that's relevant, the only part of the text that you need to explore so that you don't need to use the play bar to head back. But if you've got your own copy of the extract in front of you, you're welcome to underline things that you might find relevant. That's something that I recommend you do when you're reading those extracts at the beginning of the exam. So you now need to refer to only this part of the extract from source A. If you analyse anything that is outside of this extract, you simply won't be marked for it. So only use the part of the extract that's provided to you. How does the writer use language to describe the setting? And this is the opportunity for us to start thinking about the different ideas or the different thoughts and feelings that might be being communicated by the language. So to help you, I'm going to give you some ideas and some clues as to different things that you could explore. So we've got the verb thrashing. So that's something that you could explore. One idea is that that's got an allusion to sort of pain and it elicits ideas of torture. So we could mention that verb and think about the different layers of meaning in the use of that. You can get very high marks and top band marks for simply exploring single words, but thinking about sophisticated ideas when you do. We've also got a bit of personification. We've got the idea of the arcade that pleaded to be knocked down. So we've got a bit of personification here, and you can think about the pity and the tragedy that's being elicited here in that use. And we've also got something a little bit more sophisticated, oppression, the idea of being like held down and held back and oppressed is alluded to with this use of semantic fields. So we've got thrashing, bullying, flanked and suspicion. So it makes this seem like a really oppressive place. So that's something that you could explore. And also we've got the empty shop seem to be bullying it. We've got a wonderful metaphor there, or use of personification. Both key terms are relevant. So as you do, explore these uses of language or other uses of language that you find relevant, remember to think about why they're being used. So what are these uses of language communicating to the reader? I'm going to give you now about 15 minutes to attempt this. So you're looking to explore, I'd say probably 3 or 4 quotes in your response. If you want to link one quote to another, that's absolutely fantastic. And spotting the ways that different words and phrases are working with each other is definitely a more sophisticated thing to do, but you do want to explore this text clearly. Try your best to use 3 or 4 quotes and analyse their effects in your response. You've got 15 minutes now to explore that before we move on. You'll hear from me when your time is up. Okay, you've had enough time on this question. It's time for us to move on to the highest weighted question of the reading section. That's question 4. So, English Language Paper 2, question 4. So we have read the extracts, we've underlined things maybe if we're in the exam that stand out to us and are effective. We've ticked our 4 boxes, we've got those points, we've moved on to getting the marks for the summary question, where we try to use as many quotes as we can, finding that focus and exploring how it's evident in both sources. Then we've analysed the language in a selected part of the text, and now it's time for us to move on to question 4. It's worth 16 marks, so it's really important that you manage your time and that you're giving this, probably say around 20 minutes of your focus, because you want to try your best to get as many marks as possible for question 4. And if you limit the amount of time that you're able to spend on this question because you've spent too much time on the other questions, you're ultimately going to limit your outcome. So let's make sure that we're spending the right amount of time on this question. So question 4, let's compare the methods used. So we've got these 2 extracts here. I've provided them for you again. So there is source A and there is source B. That will just simply stop you from having to use the play bar to go all the way back to the beginning. So here's the question that you're going to need to answer. For this question, you need to refer to the whole of source A together with the whole of source B. Compare how the writers convey their different perspectives on the places they have visited. In your answer, you could compare the different perspectives on the places, compare the methods used to convey their perspectives, and support your response with references to both texts. So one of the writers has had a wonderful and splendid day at the seaside, and the other one has not been happy about it at all. So one of them's really impressed, and the other one's completely unimpressed. So very different perspectives from these 2 writers. So your job is to pick out the most relevant uses of language and all the methods used by the writers and explore that. And if you're going to be aiming for the top band, you're going to explore how they do things in similar and different ways. So if you are aiming for a 4, 5, 6, you might explore the way source A communicates its ideas and then do the same for source B. If you're aiming for the top band and the top marks, you want to be looking at a method used by source A and then write about whether source B is similar or different, and look for sophisticated ways you can compare the 2 texts. So here is a little bit of help to get you on your way. So here are some comparative points that you could make to explore them. So both use figurative language and similes to share their perspectives, but those similes communicate very different ideas and tones. One writer uses humour to mock the place, the other one takes a more reflective tone. We've also got the idea that both writers explore how the weather affects them. And one writer shares his perspective by appealing to the reader, pleading with them not to go. And the other one shares the positive personal impact the experience has had on him, which is something that you could also explore. So I'm going to give you about just under 20 minutes now to really explore this. You want to have a detailed response, exploring the different perspectives that the writers have. You'll hear from me when your time is up. Okay, you've had the time allocated for this question now, and you should have explored the text using a wide range of responses. It's time for us to move on to the final part of the exam, where we attempt the discursive writing question, the writing section of the text, which is worth 50% of the marks on the paper. So, AQA English Language Paper 2, let's move on to question 5. So we've had the reading section that's taken us 1 hour, and we've made sure that we've given ourselves a full 45 minutes to attempt the writing section. You're given less time to do this because you don't need to read any extracts, but you do need to think very carefully about how you're going to approach this question. So we start with 5 minutes planning. I recommend thinking about 5 or 6 key points that you're going to explore. Think about the structure of your response, and that will give you clear direction. The highest achieving students will have edited their work at the end. Your teachers will remind you that you should be reading your work back to check for errors of spelling, punctuation and grammar, but editing is actually the thing that's going to get you over the line if you're aiming for the highest marks available. So look through your work. If you've used a word that's not particularly ambitious, something like "it was a sad afternoon," at the end of your response in that 5 minutes, you could just put a neat line through "sad" and above it, write the words "sullen" or "melancholy," something like that. And you can steal some vocabulary from the extracts as well. If you see something that's ambitious there that you want to lift and use yourself, you're more than welcome to do that. So the examiner, chief examiner, does say that the best candidates are the ones that edit their work. So a little reminder before we get you writing. A forest is something you may have come across before. These are some persuasive techniques. So definitely address the reader. Use pronouns like you and rhetorical questions and that sort of thing to do that. We've got in yellow here fact, opinion and statistics. So if we've got the opinion of an expert, it doesn't always seem that believable and convincing. So I would say be careful with that. The highest students will write something that's really convincing, and just including the opinion of an expert that you've made up just isn't always going to be the most convincing thing to do. So that is something that you might want to think carefully about bothering with. Repetition of phrases and words or ideas is something that's always persuasive. Rhetorical questions are fantastic, and as is emotive language. And an easy, straightforward thing to do is to use tripling. Making up your own statistics is possibly going to be something that's quite boring, but if you're asked to write about something that you've got some sort of knowledge about, that could be persuasive. But I would say tread carefully. It's a lot better to address the counter argument where you say, yeah, I know some people would suggest or would feel this, but those people haven't really thought about just how important X, Y and Z is. That's going to sound more convincing and more mature and a lot more persuasive than simply ticking off your statistics and including the opinion of a fictional expert. So bear that in mind. Okay, here's the question that we're going to attempt today. So section B, writing. You're advised to spend about 45 minutes on this section. You're reminded of the need to plan your answer. So it's there in writing. They do expect you to do that, and I'm recommending 5 minutes at the beginning. You should write in full sentences. So hold that sentence in your head and then write it down, and make sure that your writing makes sense to the reader and is something that they can comfortably enjoy. And you should leave enough time to check your work at the end. I've spoken to you about editing. So rather than just checking, edit your work. You will have made a mistake. We all do. There are plenty of mistakes that we all make that we need to find and address, but on this occasion you are being marked for that, so make sure that you are dedicating enough time to both checking and editing at the end. Here's the question. Write a persuasive speech exploring ways you think you could make your local area even better. So you get 24 marks for your content and organisation and 16 marks for your technical accuracy. 50% of the marks on the paper. So from me to you, here is a bit of quick planning. So I've just come up with 5 bullet points for my speech. I'm not going to spend more than 5 minutes thinking about the direction that my writing is going to take, but you can see that I've got a really good framework to use to write a piece of really great and persuasive writing. And you're invited to use this to guide you to write some fantastic writing today. So we've got a little intro, just a little paragraph. Introducing myself to my audience. I'm remembering that it's a speech and I'm going to address them. And I'm just going to talk very briefly in that paragraph about, the idea that actually our local area does need to be improved. There are lots of things about it that we could address together in order to make it a more pleasing place to live. I might start talking about our local parks and ideas to make them better. How could we make our local parks more user-friendly and a bigger, more meaningful part of the community? So a few ideas about things that could make them more positive places. And then I'm going to talk about investment in opportunities for young people. What sort of ideas have you got? And then I'm going to address the counter argument. I'm going to think about what people who wouldn't agree with me might say. And then I'm going to explain what they haven't considered and why I'm right and they're not, in a respectful way. Then I'm going to end with a persuasive conclusion and a call to action, explaining what it is I think we should all be doing and what my audience should be thinking about doing too in the future. Now, a bit of a note before we move on, you are at liberty to make things up here. So if you're being asked to talk about making your local area better, you can talk about needing to redevelop the ice rink. It doesn't matter if you haven't got one in your local area. That isn't what you're being tested for. You're being tested for your uses of language and your ideas. So here is that question. I'm going to invite you now to try your best to attempt that. You can use my plan to do so, and I'd recommend that. I'd recommend you taking that to one of your English teachers and asking them what they think to get some feedback. You should think about spending 45 minutes on that section. We've planned it already, so maybe spend 40 minutes, just under 40 minutes writing, and then give yourself a bit of time to edit at the end. Okay, check out the other videos on my channel. I'll continue to add content. Feel free to ask for something you'd like to see me cover in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share, and keep revising.